Has Trump been flipped on by Louise Burke and Kate Hartson as he changed his story about the Mark Milley Iran tape 3 different times yesterday? Oh, no, those weren't the most carefully guarded military secrets we have. Plans for war against Iran. They were building plans of buildings and golf courses with buildings on them. Yeah, that's the ticket. As that was unfolding in Trump's usual cornered, lying 8-year-old's way, something more intriguing and probably more important was spotted moving in the shadows of this ever increasingly bizarre story.
Bring some Cokes in, please.
Yes, this increasingly bizarre story. Not one of the analyses of the impact of the 2 minutes of his exquisitely detailed narration in real time of every detail of his violations of the Espionage Act, except announcing, I am now gathering, transmitting, or losing defense information. That's 18 U.S. Code 793 if you're scoring at home or even if you're alone. Not one analysis of the impact of the recording, not one, puts the recording in its proper and its simplest perspective. The recording does not exist in a vacuum. The trial will not consist of Jack Smith simply introducing himself to the jury, pressing play, nodding along for 2 minutes, and then saying, and with that, ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution rests. Yet that is exactly how the recording has been assessed so far. It convicts Trump. No, it's exonerating of Trump. No, it's viscerally damning in a way no testimony could be. It's infuriating. It's sociopathic. It's treasonous. It's a tape of 5 people talking in a room. It's a tape of 5 people, any of whom can be called to testify about it. And we don't really know, because nobody's really focused on them, who the other 4 people are. And we don't know what they think of the recording, and we don't know what they thought of the meeting, and they don't know what they saw Trump holding in his hand, besides his excuse. And we don't know whether any of them are already on that list of dozens of possible witnesses Jack Smith may call in the document's trial. And more importantly still, as those figures move about in the shadows of this story, and we think we know who they all are, 2 of them are, in effect, missing, and they may have flipped on Trump. Missing is probably too strong a term, but certainly missing in a public sense. Who are they, and where are they, and why aren't they the next part of this story, and why have we heard nothing from them or about them? Okay, we've known from the beginning that 2 Trump staffers were present, and that a second recording of this conversation with the Mark Meadows ghostwriters was made by one of the Trump staffers, Margot Martin, the young Trump press aide whom Fox News mistook at the arraignment for Melania. But after the recording went public Monday night, it was widely reported that the gushingly sycophantic giggling woman with what was described by one wag as that fake Bryn Mawr accent, who is heard on it throughout it, is Trump's hapless press spokesperson, Liz Harrington. 3 down, 2 to go, Miss Kilgallen. The first leaks about this recording, long before the rest of us got to hear it, were that it was made by 2 researchers working on the autobiography of the Trump chief of staff, the one voted most likely to be indicted, Mark Meadows. Then the autobiography became a, quote, autobiography, unquote, and the 2 researchers became a ghostwriter and an editor or someone similar. And then last night, the pair became a writer or editor and one of the 2 women who essentially created their own publishing firm in order to put out the Mark Meadows book. Their names are Louise Burke and Kate Hartson. I mentioned them at the beginning because maybe they have flipped against Trump. And Hartson, in particular, was famous for a little while in 2021 because literally days after January 6th, she was fired and her conservative imprint at Hatchet Books was discontinued. And so out the door went this woman, Hartson, the editor who bought and published a Trump Jr. book and a Judge Jeanine book and a Vivek Ramaswamy book. And 6 months later, either she or her partner Burke, or both, is at Trump's golf course at Bedminster, giggling along with Margot Martin and probably Liz Harrington, and they're, by the way, getting plans for bombing Tehran and or building a new caddy shack near the clubhouse. Yeah, a classified caddy shack that he could have declassified when he was president, like he says on the tape. They get that bombing plan and or caddy shack waved in their faces before the real fun begins.
Bring some Cokes in, please.
But last night, buried in the 10th paragraph of a sleepy little story in the New York Post, came a throwaway reference. Quote, 2 of the people Trump speaks to in the audio are believed to be Kate Hartson and Louise Burke, who had started All Seasons Press, a conservative publishing company. Unquote. First of all, that's All Seasons Press, not 4 Seasons. 4 Seasons was the landscaping company Trump and Giuliani thought was the swanky Philadelphia hotel. More importantly, what is extremely extraordinary about this passing reference to the mystery of those who may be the 2 most important witnesses Jack Smith will call in this case is that this appears to be the first time in nearly 2 years that either Ms. Hartson or Ms. Burke have been mentioned anywhere in the media. There is a story about the founding of their conservative publishing company in the New York Times on June 16, 2021. They are on with Tucker Carlson the next day. You remember him. That is turned into a Fox website story the day after that, and then there's a passing reference to them in a feature on another publisher, literally their names and nothing else, in Slate a few weeks later. My point is, right after a flurry of publicity for their publishing house being founded and the start of the process of publishing the Mark Meadows book, one or both of these conservative martyrs go to Bedminster about a month later in July 2021 to interview Trump for the Meadows book, and they get shown top secret war plans authored by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Or it was a new golf cart path design for Trump Doral that, quote, was done by the military and given to me and wins my case for me. And this happens, and they see whatever this is, and then they disappear. Again, disappear from public view. I have no reason to believe they're actually missing. But you do not have to be a hyperactive imagination kind of guy to wonder if the Post is right, and it was both of them, that as Ms. Burke and Ms. Hartson left Bedminster that day 2 years ago, next month, one of them realized that they had just been shown top secrets, and they had it within their power to get Trump indicted for not keeping top secrets secret, and it put the fear of God into them right at that moment. Hell, Kid Rock says Trump did it with him, and even he was smart enough to get frightened. What would you do? No matter how crazed a Trump cultist you might be, if he put you in that spot, or if your first thought isn't, I know stuff I shouldn't know, what is it again that happens to people who know stuff they shouldn't know? What, on the other hand, if you're just an actually loyal, hyper-patriotic American, and you're wondering, why is Trump showing this stuff to anybody? Why is he showing it to me in his golf club where anybody can get in because all you need is cash? Did Louise Burke and Kate Hartson talk to a lawyer? Did they wait and talk to a lawyer later? Did they lay low until a year ago when the first stories began to break about Trump holding on to classified documents? And then did they go to the FBI, to the DOJ? Or, via an exact opposite route, did they downplay the secret nature of what they'd seen so they could put it in Mark Meadows' autobiography that Mark Meadows didn't write? And they fangirled this whole experience, and they told all their pals, and one day somebody from the FBI called them and says, kind of need to interview you. You may be in possession of top secret classified information that you're not supposed to know, and here's a subpoena just in case. Now look, I am wildly out on several different limbs, on several different trees, all at the same time here, so I could be wildly wrong. But I'm going to revise something I suggested here, that the recording of this meeting, the recording not allegedly done by Trump's Melania double Margot Martin, that this recording does not belong to Mark Meadows. Instead, it belongs to All Seasons Press and to Louise Burke and to Kate Hartson. And while Meadows would have a reason to leak it, if he really has flipped on Trump and decided to completely destroy Trump, I can't see what benefit Burke and Hartson and All Seasons would gain from anonymously leaking it, unless those they leaked it to, like CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post and NBC and CBS and the Genesee Valley penny saver, now all owe them huge favors. So I suppose that means we need to put back on the table the chance that somebody in the DOJ leaked that recording, or a Trump lawyer did, or somebody on the periphery somewhere, or. The important point here is there are not just 4 other people on that tape as Trump crimes and does play-by-play of his crimes. There are 4 witnesses. And while Margot Martin was on the campaign trail with Trump last night and Liz Harrington was back somewhere retweeting her, and I'm finding it hard to believe either of them will be smart enough to jump ship in time, you have to wonder if the, let me now call it, retirement from public view of publishers Burke and Hartson follows a timeline in which they are protecting themselves. And a copy Jack Smith has of that Trump conversation about where to put his highly confidential ball washer is the one Burke and Hartson recorded, and they are already witnesses. And Mr. Trump, perhaps this will refresh your memory. By the way, in this perfect little 2-minute radio play, The Self-Defenestration of Dementia J. Trump, written by Dementia J. Trump, audio by Dementia J. Trump, the characters are him and the 4 women, that's Martin and Harrington, the gullible employees, and Burke and Hartson, the witnesses. But there is also a 6th character who has no lines and is heard only off stage. And as you will now realize, there's actually been a reason I have kept playing this clip, because it is the 6th character to whom Trump says,
Bring some Cokes in, please.
And the speculation now is the guy he tells to bring in the Cokes is Walt Nauta, his co-defendant, who was not, as it turned out, arraigned in Florida yesterday because heavy thunderstorms put a ground stop on all the flights out of Newark Airport in New Jersey. And also, oh, by the way, The Guardian reports there's also the little matter of the Florida lawyer Nauta had tentatively retained, suddenly demanding way more money at the last minute because, hell, would you take any part of this case? The Guardian's Hugo Lowell adds this twist. Nauta would not pay the extra green for the mouthpiece, quote, even though he would be paid by Trump's political action committee, Save America, which has also been paying the fees of Nauta's lead lawyer, Stanley Woodward. There is also reason to believe that anything Trump can do to slow this all down, he will do, and having a reason to delay Nauta's arraignment until the end of next week because I'm not going to pay a lot for this lawyer. It ain't much, but it's a week. And I'll get back to the tease from earlier about Trump changing his version of the recording story 3 times in a moment, but also pertinent on the witness front. CNN dropped a big headline with no details behind it last night. Quote, Rudy Giuliani interviewed in special counsel's 2020 election interference probe. Ooh. That's, though, pretty much the whole story. CNN has nothing else, not when, no specifics, not even a topic heading. It was with Giuliani and his attorney, Robert Costello, and the word used is interviewed, so that would make you assume it was not in front of the grand jury. And the rest of the piece is the story so far. Also, Kevin McCarthy briefly yesterday seemed lukewarm to Trump's candidacy for next year. Can he win that election? McCarthy asked CNBC rhetorically. Yeah, he can win that election. The question is he the strongest to win the election? I don't know that answer. Oh, well, McCarthy quickly found out a different answer. One Trump phone call later, and Kevin McCarthy issued a statement that Trump was, quote, the strongest political opponent for Joe Biden next year because Kevin McCarthy is a whore and Donald Trump is a pimp. Got it? Okay. Back to Trump and the recordings, and we'll let the key question, did Louise Burke and Kate Hartson, who you did not know existed 10 minutes ago, flip on Trump? We'll let that just hang there for the more reportorially connected among you, dear listener. Trump really did change his story about this 3 times just yesterday. We'll start at the baseline. When he got burned by Brett Baier on Fox last week, Trump insisted about the document referred to in the transcript of the recording, quote, there was no document, unquote. After the tape emerged Monday night, Trump responded angrily on social media with comparatively low-key stochastic terroristic threats against the special counsel, but about the evidence itself he wrote only, I come under the Presidential Records Act, which is not the same thing as saying there is no document, so that was change number 1. Then, interviewed by Fox at Concord, New Hampshire yesterday, Trump was asked how the fact of the recording squares with his absolute statement to Baier there was no document, and he tossed out a word salad. Quote, I said it very clearly. I had a whole desk full of lots of papers, mostly newspaper articles, copies of magazines, copies of different plans, copies of stories having to do with many, many subjects, and what was said was absolutely fine, unquote. So there was a document, while simultaneously there also was not a document. It's both change number 2 and the original version of a Donovan song. Then, on board his plane to Semaphore News and ABC News, Trump changed his story a 3rd time in one day. What we heard was, quote, bravado, if you want to know the truth. It was bravado. Trump? Bravado? No way. Quoting again, I was talking and just holding up papers and talking about them, but I had no documents. I didn't have any documents. One of the reporters then quoted change number 2 earlier in the day when Trump said what he had was copies of magazines, copies of different plans. So now Trump says, did I use the word plans? What I'm referring to is magazines, newspapers, plans of buildings. I had plans of buildings. You know, building plans. I had plans of a golf course. Don't mention the grave near the first tee. Don't mention the grave near the first tee. Don't mention the grave near the first tee. Semaphore reports Trump added, quote, I just held up a whole pile of, my desk is loaded up with papers. I have papers from 25 different things, unquote. Such as, he suggested, articles about Iran. And then quoting Semaphore again, at one point, Trump gestured to the seat next to him on the plane where a stack of various papers, newspapers, copies of his speech, printouts of articles sat. He grabbed some from the pile and placed them in front of him, moving them around as he spoke and offering up a physical reenactment of what he said was occurring on the audio tape, unquote. Then he was asked if he had any regrets. He did not go Sinatra on you. No, I have no regrets. I didn't have a classified document. There was no classified document on my desk, unquote. Just a bunch of highly secret golf course building plans that the military had done for him. And they're off the record. And he could have declassified them when he was president. And they're plans of buildings. I had plans of buildings, you know. What do they call building plans? What do they call building plans? Quick, Trump, quick. What do they call them? You know, building plans. And then somebody tapped into the zeitgeist. And here is a lesson from an old man who saw Watergate unfold in real time. Never ignore the zeitgeist during political conspiracies and political controversies. And one of the reporters asked Trump if the audio tape would affect whether he would consider a plea deal. The audio tape has caused the reporters to have the gonads sufficiently required to ask Trump to his face about taking a plea deal. That is the new zeitgeist. Well, Trump went into a diatribe against Biden, and then the fear receded and the bravado came back. Frankly, that you even ask a question like that's a disgrace. So let's end it, unquote. And no cokes were brought in. Thank you, Nancy Faust. Also of interest here, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. holds an event with a vax conspiracy theorist who believes and says that people who get vaccinated get magnetized. RFK Jr. is also mentioned as a potential running mate for Trump. And yes, yesterday I called RFK Jr. JFK Jr. because I'm Q. And I have this secret message for all of you QP dolls. Quote, that's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Postscripts to the news, some headlines, some updates, some snark, some predictions. Dateline the Supreme Court. Roberts, Sotomayor, Kagan, Kavanaugh, Barrett, Jackson vote for the continuation of democracy. Alito, Gorsuch, Thomas vote against. Presumably the travel agency's calls got through in time. This was the vote yesterday on Moore v. Harper, and by 6-3, down goes independent state legislature theory. The Elections Clause does not vest exclusive and independent authority in state legislatures to set the rules regarding federal elections, writes Chief Justice Roberts. A pleasant enough surprise, except Kavanaugh wrote a separate opinion, basically saying he thinks maybe it does, just that this case didn't prove it. So it's really like democracy only has a 5-4 lead on the court. Dateline Tallahassee, Florida, Senator Rick Scott, birth name, of course, was Rick Scott Voldemort, announcing what he called a travel warning yesterday that, quote, I'm warning socialists and communists not to travel to Florida. They are not welcome in the Sunshine State. He added people who believe in big government shouldn't come there either. Specifically, he said to all of these groups, do not take vacations in Florida or move to Florida. Florida's leading industry is tourism. So all of those of you in socialist countries, remember, do not go to Florida for any reason. The senator has just threatened your safety. Oh, and the state of Florida gets an estimated $62 billion a year more from the semi-socialist government of the United States of America than it sends to the semi-socialist government of the United States of America. So let's stop that right quick. Dateline purchased New York and the world headquarters of Pepsi. I have had for many decades a theory that if I were to live long enough, I would see every sketch ever performed about American society by my heroes and later my friends, Bob Elliott and Ray Goulding, and my heroes and later my friends, the members of Monty Python's Flying Circus. I would see all of their sketches actually happen. One of the best Bob and Ray sketches had Bob as the public service host on their imaginary radio station interviewing the chairman of the National Ketchup Association about how to correctly pour ketchup. And after a demonstration that goes wonderfully awry and the admission that having to hit the bottle of the bottom of ketchup was, in fact, a marketing device by the ketchup manufacturers, Ray tells Bob, by coincidence, it's National Ketchup Week, and his group is expecting an enormous growth in the amount of ketchup consumed in the United States because he has hit on the brilliant idea to expand the breadth of the ketchup footprint by introducing new flavors of ketchup. New ketchup flavors? Asks a very dubious Bob. Ray replies in the perfect expression of bureaucratic condescension. Well, not ketchup as you civilians know it now, but I've discovered that the entire field of dessert toppings has remained utterly untapped by our industry. So we will be using National Ketchup Week this year to introduce our new chocolate-flavored ketchup for use on ice cream. There is another pause, and then Bob says, so you're holding National Ketchup Week to promote the sale of chocolate sauce? There's one more pause, and Ray says, well, gee, when you put it that way, it does sound completely idiotic, doesn't it? What's worse, it's all my idea. I better get back to the office and stop this thing, but fast. Then you hear a man running away and a door slam, and then the theme to the program. The Culinary Institute of America's Business Consulting Unit has announced that it is teaming up with Pepsi to introduce a new sweet and tangy ketchup, Pepsi Cola Chup. I'll say that one more time. Pepsi Cola Chup, which is designed to be used on hot dogs on the 4th of July. So you'll put more ketchup on hot dogs. The new cola-flavored ketchup will be available at several baseball stadiums for free on July 4th itself. I wish Bob Elliott, Ray Goulding were still alive to hear this, so Bob could say to Pepsi and the Culinary Institute of America, so you've invented a new flavor of ketchup in order to promote the sale of cola-flavored mustard? Still ahead, you saw that the Fox story was finally confirmed, that they pulled Laura Ingraham out of primetime, and they put her on at 7, and they put that imbecile Jesse Waters on at 8. They kept Hannity at 9. They put the guy with the compulsive head tilt, Greg Gutt, I think is his name, at 10 o'clock. This was described as a bid to win the next generation of Fox News viewers. I have bad news. There isn't one. The species is too old to reproduce. And it may very well be the same at CNN and MSNBC. Thing is, it didn't have to happen so soon, but they all let their cable operations get run by and bullied by people who did not understand the concept of cable news. And that flashed me back to the first day I really realized that was the case, and I saw all this coming, which will be 15 years ago this September. It was the day at MSNBC when Tom Brokaw screwed everything up. Ahead. First, the daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's other worst persons in the world. The Bronze, the National Hockey League. Last week, Commissioner Gary Bettman sold out every LGBTQ fan, player, and other participant in the game, and everybody else dependent on an NHL team to raise consciousness about their own issue, whatever it is, by declaring that while the league would still hold Pride nights, it would no longer let players wear Pride warm-up uniforms for 10 lousy minutes before each game, or any other special pregame uniforms. And we'll see about that come Military Appreciation Day, Military Appreciation Week, Military Appreciation Month, and of course, Military Appreciation Quarter. Tonight, the NHL opens its annual amateur player draft in Nashville, Tennessee, where your hosts, the Nashville Predators, the majority ownership of which gradually is being taken over by former Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam, the homophobe who not only opposes same-sex marriage, but who signed a bill designed to make it more difficult for same-sex couples to adopt children. The NHL, the National Hypocrisy League, one of whose mottos is, hockey is for everyone. Yes, everyone except gays, lesbians, allies, everybody. The runner-up, Elon Musk. It is unclear what he's doing at Twitter. Evergreen tweet. But either there is a new bug that is restricting by accident just the accounts of people who have blocked too many of the new right-wing issue ads that have begun to take over individual feeds on that site, or there's a feature that does that. Either way, the feed of the Tennessee Holler says, quote, "It seems Mr. Free Speech Musk is restricting the accounts of people who block the spam ads he's using to keep Twitter afloat as he turns it into a haven for right-wing extremism and porn bots. Lovely," unquote. No reply from Musk. Musk was busy sending out tweets defending Jordan Peterson and training for the heavyweight Ozempic championship fight against Zuckerberg. But our winner today is me. Yes, by all accounts, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s online health policy roundtable did go off as scheduled last night. I'm phrasing it that way because I couldn't find anybody who would admit they attended. The real star of the RFK Jr. virtual conspiracy was supposed to be Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, the osteopath whose license is being challenged after she testified to the Ohio House that if you got the COVID vaccine, you would become magnetized and metal would cling to you. That's who RFK Jr. is hanging out with, or sticking to, as the case might be. Also, there's the Nick at Night retirement home of TV News, News Nation, which is still planning a live town hall with RFK Jr. tonight. The host is Elizabeth Vargas, who bombed out of ABC. She says this is everybody's chance to really sort of get unedited and live, hear him speak, and listen to how he thinks. This town hall is not a town hall about vaccines. Because we haven't gotten one chance to hear Robert F. Kennedy Jr. speak, even as he's been on every right-wing outlet for the last 3 months during his Trojan horse Democratic candidacy. Even though he's not a member of the Democratic Party, he's a member of the Looney Party. But the award still goes to me because in this podcast yesterday, I referred to RFK Jr. as JFK Jr., and that's really unfortunate because A, it's a mistake, and B, because JFK Jr. has been dead just shy of 24 years now, and the only part of RFK Jr. that's dead is his sanity. Me! Today's worst me in the world! Finally, our number one story on the countdown, and my favorite topic, me. I missed the exact anniversary by a day, but it's close enough. The demand for spots in the Shea Stadium press box that night was so great that there was assigned seating. I had no real reason to be there, but as usual, the New York Mets took care of me. And so on Friday, the 5th of September, 2008, I was shoulder to shoulder with reporter friends, watching the Mets begin to blow their 3-game pennant race lead against the Philadelphia Phillies. Sorry, Mets fans, for bringing this up again. Brett Myers had just struck out New York's David Wright looking when my phone rang. It was my agent, Gene Sage. "They just called," she said flatly. "You and Matthews have been fired from anchoring the presidential debates because of what you said." What I had said had been said 3 nights previously. Chris Matthews and I were co-anchoring the Republican convention on MSNBC. He was there in Minneapolis. I was in the studios in New York, ostensibly so I could also anchor hurricane coverage, although it was pretty clear that at least half the reason I was not in Minneapolis was because the Republicans had threatened NBC or said they couldn't guarantee my safety or something like that, and NBC folded. So I was the one during MSNBC's coverage of the 2008 Republican convention who had to throw it to a video they were introducing that we had been told by the Republicans was a, quote, tribute to the dead of 9/11. It was, in fact, a snuff film. All of the images that all of the networks had stopped showing within weeks or even days of the attacks, all of those images were in this video. People jumping and falling to their deaths from the World Trade Center on 9/11. Endless replays of the planes hitting the towers. Dismembered bodies in the plaza. The building collapses. The equally terrifying scenes at the Pentagon. And all with a grotesque Robert Davi voiceover emphasizing that this was all the Democrats' fault. The message was simple. Elect Obama and you will die like this. I was angry, just on that base level. For the 5.5 years I had been back at MSNBC, we had been rigorous about not showing any of that video. There were rules that if we had to for some reason, we should show only the still images, and even then, only with extensive warnings to the viewers. But I knew from my conversations with the president of MSNBC, Phil Griffin, who I'd only known for 28 years at that point, that he would insist that on the scene in Minneapolis, Matthews and Tom Brokaw, whose career at NBC I had resurrected after Brian Williams had buried him alive 2 years earlier, that one or both of them would rebuke the GOP for showing not a 9/11 tribute, but, as I just said, a 9/11 snuff film. The video ended, and we came out to Brokaw with Matthews, and Brokaw kind of coughed, and Matthews said, "Wow." And he turned to Brokaw and said in that loose fire hose delivery of his, "Tom, that kind of underscores terrorism, big thing for Republicans as they try to stop Obama." Brokaw droned on approvingly. The Republicans sneaking a snuff film, a banned video, onto MSNBC, and by the way, also onto CNN, onto NBC, onto CBS, onto ABC, without any warning, that was not mentioned by Brokaw or Matthews. Back to New York and Keith. I was supposed to ad-lib a tease about what we were expecting from the Republican convention for the rest of the night and then throw to a commercial. Instead, I said, and this is a paraphrase, the original tape disappeared that night, that before we moved on, I felt I needed to apologize, that we at MSNBC, and for that matter NBC News, had extremely strict rules about not showing that video the Republicans had just shown you without any warning, without any context, and we certainly would not have shown the horror and death and blamed it on the Democrats, or for that matter, blamed it on the Republicans. I said if we had done such a thing ourselves, there would have been people fired at NBC News. The public program the GOP provided said that was going to be a 9/11 tribute film, I said, and so did the private conversations with the network, which included the reminder from NBC and MSNBC that we had rules against showing the scenes of the horrible death and mutilation and destruction. So I apologized on behalf of whoever trusted the Republicans to live up to their word that MSNBC viewers were forced to see the video our network had long before vowed never to show again. So 3 nights later, without as much as an email, this Griffin guy had called my agent and told her I was fired, Matthews too, from our further coverage of the upcoming McCain-Obama debates. She related these details to me as I walked down the many ramps in the back of Shea Stadium towards the subway. I told her to call Griffin back and tell him I had quit on the spot right then, and he could work his way out of the ensuing disaster. Liberal network MSNBC fires liberal host Olbermann for criticizing conservatives for sneaking 9/11 snuff film onto MSNBC. He could figure that out any way he wanted. And he could hear my response on, I don't know, Good Morning America, CBS This Morning, the PBS NewsHour, and any other news program that bothered to ask me to stop by and talk. I phoned my live-in girlfriend, Katie Tur, and told her I was on my way home, and I made a few phone calls to friendly voices within the NBC management structure and got from them a clearer picture of what had happened. And despite the spotty cell service along the elevated line heading back to Manhattan, I got a message from a newspaper reporter friend who neatly tied together all that I was hearing elsewhere. Tom Brokaw is going around NBC saying he got you fired from the debates because the Republicans told him to. 9, maybe 10 months earlier, Phil Griffin had come to me and asked me if I would be okay with this guy who had been kind of disappeared by the network. Tom Brokaw was his name, appearing during our weekly coverage of the Democratic and Republican primaries. Just a couple of minutes, like from a perspective desk. That's all he wants to do. Tom's really unhappy. Brian has frozen him out of everything. Brian Williams, of course. I was appalled, but not surprised. The power had gone to Brian's head, and of course there it had not met much resistance. Plus, as I said to Griffin, you're asking me if I'd like to add Tom Brokaw's experience and Tom Brokaw's gravitas to stuff I'm anchoring when I'm not sure I know as much as I really need to know to do this right? You're asking me this. Tom fit in beautifully, and twice after those long Tuesday evenings in the primary season, he sent me brief emails awarding me what he called the game ball because he was so impressed by my ability to balance the roles of political anchor and political commentator. Having tried this myself, one of them read, I know what a perilous tightrope this is, game ball to KO. I'm mocking him now, but these meant so much to me, I printed the emails out and carried them in my wallet. And now he, was claiming he had gotten me fired because, as my newspaper friend said, the Republicans told him to. That was not hard to unpack either. Tim Russert had died on June 3rd of that year. I anchored that night until 2 in the morning. It was still an open wound. There were still tears. We didn't know it then, but the structure of NBC News and the perilous tightrope balancing NBC and MSNBC had died with Tim Russert. So did the role of moderator of the second debate between John McCain and Barack Obama, scheduled for about a month after my subway ride on October 7th in Nashville. Tim had not even been buried yet when Brokaw began to angle to get that assignment, along with brushing away the dirt of his penny ante role on the MSNBC perspective desk. We never saw him again, in order that he could take Tim's spot as Brian Williams' sidekick on Big NBC. The month before, August, there was a story coming out of the east end of the third floor at 30 Rock, where NBC News management sat around not doing much of anything, that a Republican goon named Ed Gillespie had been in there with Griffin and the NBC News president Steve Kappas trying to get me silenced or fired or off the convention coverage or something, and that somebody prominent within NBC News was in there with Gillespie or was invoked by Gillespie. The rumor mill wasn't certain. As I switched from the elevated 7 train to the underground F train, the whole thing came together. Before my comments about the GOP convention 9/11 snuff film, Ed Gillespie had come in and had somehow vaguely threatened Kappas and Griffin about me, using as leverage the debate which Tom Brokaw was now supposed to moderate. And when I apologized for their video on our air, Gillespie must have turned it into an either-or. Get rid of me, or McCain would refuse to participate in any debate moderated by Brokaw or anybody from NBC News. And Brokaw had already come back from the dead once in 2008, and he would be damned if he would be forced to do it a second time. But as the train took me home to an apartment I was now going to have to sell, since I had just quit MSNBC on the spot for folding to such obvious Republican blackmail, something else now occurred to me. Why would MSNBC or NBC or our parent corporation at the time, GE, actually think that they could remove me from the debate coverage on MSNBC, where the Rachel Maddow show had yet to be born, and the 3 times a night my show ran accounted for something like 60% of the entire day's network audience, and do that without getting a really bad reaction from our audience? Plus, if a newspaper man already knew the Brokaw part, how could this story be avoided? MSNBC announced it had removed its liberal star, Keith Olbermann, from coverage of the McCain-Obama presidential debates. Sources confirmed former NBC News anchorman Tom Brokaw, now an MSNBC commentator on Olbermann's coverage, had helped the Republican Party to blackmail NBC into the decision. Olbermann immediately resigned, saying, quote, "In succumbing to this coercion on behalf of John McCain, NBC has now forfeited any right to further be called a news organization, and I'm sad to say MSNBC, which I built, is now dead." My God! MSNBC, and NBC News for that matter, would have committed corporate suicide before the weekend was over. At that point, it dawned on me that the only thing that could save the credibility of the whole news division and the careers of Griffin and Kappas and NBC Network President Jeff Zucker, and especially the career of Tom Brokaw, was for me to publicly state that I had asked to be removed from anchoring the debates because the whatever was just too much blah, blah, blah for me, and I felt I should stick to the post-debate analysis and commentary. NBC would now have a choice. They could fire me from the debates and destroy everything, including the $100 million a year or so in profit that NBC made off MSNBC, or I could, lie and claim it was my idea and save everybody's ass, including my own. I got out of the subway and raced home. Katie met me at the door with a big hug. She had been crying. "Relax," I said. "I'm not quitting. In fact, I'm going to get a huge raise now. Listen carefully." I called my agent and I explained the idea that had lit over my head on the subway like a light bulb to both of them. I said, "You call Phil Griffin back and explain to him that I will personally save his job and Steve Kappas's and Jeff Zucker's and Tom Brokaw's and everybody else's. I'll take the fall. Instead of letting them all get fired by the MSNBC audience, I'll say this was my idea. And all it will cost, Phil, is $12 million. And he has to leak the terms so everybody knows it cost him $12 million. And she paused for a second and said, it's genius. It might not quite be $12 million, but I bet they'll pay you at least $9. On Sunday, several news organizations reported I had asked to be taken off the anchor desk. 2 months and 1 week later, the New York Times wrote, quote, Keith Olbermann, the anchor of Countdown on MSNBC, has extended his contract through the next presidential election season, the network announced. Mr. Olbermann and MSNBC essentially tore up the 4-year, $4 million a year contract they signed last year and replaced it with one worth about $7.5 million a year. So that was a $3.5 million raise for 4 years for a total of $14 million. Except the new contract added 2 years to my old deal, so the raise was actually $22 million. All stories have a punchline. This punchline is about Tom Brokaw. We would have gotten away with this cleanly. NBC would have gotten its money's worth for the $22 million in hush money, which is what it was, that it had to pay me because I had agreed with them rolling over for the Republican Party blackmail, except Brokaw could not keep his mouth shut. So proud was he of preserving his role as the moderator of the October 7th NBC debate that he had to explain in explicit detail in public how he went to his bosses at NBC News and threatened them on behalf of the GOP. On September 29, 2008, a lengthy and glowing Brokaw profile appeared in the New York Times. Quote, Mr. Brokaw said that over the summer he had, quote, advocated within the executive suite of NBC News to modify the anchor duties of the MSNBC hosts Keith Olbermann and Chris Matthews on election night and on nights when there were presidential debates. Mr. Brokaw said he had also conducted some shuttle diplomacy in recent weeks between NBC and the McCain campaign. His mission, he said, was to assure the candidates' aides that despite some negative on-air commentary by Mr. Olbermann in particular, Mr. McCain could still get a fair shake from NBC News, unquote. Oh, that was his mission? The hell it was. Happily, Brokaw just could not resist boasting even further. The next sentence actually reads, quote, Mr. Brokaw said he had been told by a senior McCain aide, whom he did not name, that the campaign had been reluctant to accept an NBC representative as one of the moderators of the 3 presidential debates until his name was invoked. Quote, one of the things I was told by this person was that they were so irritated, they said, if it's an NBC moderator for any of these debates, we won't go, Mr. Brokaw said. Quoting him again, my name came up and they said, oh, hell, we have to do it because it's going to be Brokaw. There is a second punchline. After all this, when the new format came out, and I was sitting there counting my money, MSNBC had David Gregory, quote, anchor, unquote, the debate coverage. David was terrific during this. Practically all this meant anyway was that I was on the air until literally 90 seconds before each debate began, which is when I said, now here's David Gregory, and he was then on for 4 or 5 minutes after the debate ended, which is when he said, now here's Keith Olbermann. And on election night itself, with David again formally anchoring, per the Republican blackmail, at 10:59 p.m., to his great credit and to my eternal gratitude, David Gregory said, with the last voting booth closing at 11 p.m., NBC News can now project the winner of the 2008 presidential election. Keith? Bless him. Plus, I still have all the money. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Here are the credits. Most of the music was arranged, produced, and performed by Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, who are the Countdown musical directors. Guitars, bass, and drums by Brian Ray. All orchestration and keyboards by John Philip Chanel. Produced by TKO Brothers. Other Beethoven selections have been arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. Sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, and it was written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Musical comments by Nancy Faust, the best baseball stadium organist ever. Our announcer today was my friend Stevie Van Zandt. Everything else was pretty much my fault. So that's countdown for this, the 904th day since Donald Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Arrest him again while we still can. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Till then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.
Bring some Cokes in, please.